Welcome everybody to this Thailand Southeast Asia Seminar Series event. This is a collaboration that we're having between the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre, the Nordic Institute of Asian Studies here in Copenhagen, where I am, and the New York Southeast Asia Network, obviously in New York, where our coordinator Sriratana is sitting. So we're doing this simultaneously at the moment on 3 continents, but on behalf of 4. And we're welcoming today our speaker, Verita Sriratana, who is actually in Thailand. So that covers 4 continents in a sense here. So I'm Duncan McCargo. I'm director of the Nordic Institute of Asian Studies, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Verita, who was recently in the vicinity because she was a visiting fellow at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute for Human Rights over at Lund University, which is just across the water from Copenhagen, for those who don't know. So she was our near neighbor during the past semester, but is now back in Thailand. And Verita is an associate professor in the Faculty of Arts at Chulalongkorn University, and like me is somebody who started off in that wonderful subject of English literature and only later took a few detours into some different fields of study. So she wrote a PhD thesis on Virginia Woolf at St. Andrews University and has been working on quite a range of different topics. She's rather a multilingual and polymathic individual, and latterly has been moving into the field of human rights and starting to think about some of the contentious issues affecting Thailand today, which is why she's here for this seminar. But she's not a person who too many people in Thai studies probably know, because this is one of her first adventures into joining a kind of Thai studies oriented seminar. So Verita, thank you so much for coming and welcome to the Social Science Seminar Series.
Thank you very much, Duncan. So I think I'll start. So, hello,
yes,
everyone.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Oh, it's such an honor. I'm very excited. It's such an honor to take part in today's talk. First off, I'd like to dedicate this talk to fighters of gender justice in Thailand and beyond, and especially those who are working late tonight, like my friend, activist and human rights lawyer, Nada Chayachit, who just posted about the case of transgender being assaulted by their own family just now. And I like to say that I'm so indebted to the information and stories shared with me by female activists, and so a bit of a disclaimer, I'm by no means speaking for the female activists. I'm here to humbly raise awareness of what's going on within the pro-democracy movement. So to refer to my spatial setting a little bit, I'm back in Bangkok, like what Duncan just said. I'd like to set the statistical background a little bit. Okay, I'm speaking from a country which the 2021 World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report ranked 79th out of 153 countries in terms of gender equality. Think about that. And we're 134th in political empowerment. And just to top things off, if I remember correctly, according to the Ministry of Justice, over the past 3 years, Thai prisons had received 10,000 to 15,000 sexual offenders whose victims are almost all women. So that's the setting, that's the country that I'm speaking from. I'd like to begin by my talk with a caricature, which has been shared widely on social media around the month of August 2021. Now, due to pressure, due to being called out very heavily, it's now deleted. Okay, so these are the original Thai texts, and this is the English translation from the text. So all translation is mine. So the caricature was created by a Facebook page called Arai Krap Nia. Arai Krap Nia translates as "What the heck is this?" Okay, and this is actually an anti-Prayut page, heavily subscribed by those who regard themselves as anti-ultranationalists, anti-royalists, progressive. Okay, I'll be doing this most of the time. Okay, as you can see, the caricature depicts a man who has 3 bullets in his gun, pondering upon the question as to which of the 3 persons before him he would use the bullets to kill. Mysteriously, there's a monster / zombie. There's in the middle Salim, okay, royalist, ultranationalist woman who supports Uncle Tu, okay, Uncle Tu being the nickname of Prayut Chan-o-cha. She's marked by her whistle, yellow shirt, and portrait of you-know-who. And on the left, you have a feminist, okay, protesting against sexual harassment, calling out patriarchy, and the man eventually decides to fire all 3 bullets at the feminist activists. So this image with blatant femicide message has been widely shared online and praised for its sense of humor, much to feminist activists and their allies' detriment and disappointment. Even those who call themselves politically progressive, pro-democracy fighters, of which visible majority are men, they endorsed it or saw nothing wrong with it. So reflecting such message in the caricature is what I would call strategically the ผู้หญิงขี้เสือก or speech, or the meddlesomeness of the female sex speech given by a famous male pro-democracy fighter on the slide, who harked back, surprise, surprise, to the story of Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis, Christian Old Testament. And I thought we are a Buddhist country, but anyway, to prove how women are inferior, weak, emotional, and evil, the cause of Adam's disobedience and probably the potential cause of Thailand's pro-democracy movement's downfall, for advocating for gender justice, which means getting too distracted and causing rift and division among the pro-democracy fighters instead of keeping our eyes on the prize, according to that famous civil rights movement song, and focusing on winning first. He's called out, of course, to be fair, he's called out, he apologized. He's called out by my friend Wada Shumapon Tangklayang. And I have to say, Duncan, as a literary scholar, I can recommend Ataponan, like A Dose of John Milton's Paradise Lost, where Eve is actually presented as equal to Satan, right? Not accepting hierarchy, whereas Adam is a mere passive recipient of the fruit. So that's the importance of literary studies, which I advocate as well. So from the example, female activists face more cyberbullying, and especially in the form of sexual objectification and body shaming, and attempts to tone police and language police them than their male counterparts. Okay, so this can be seen reflected through the coinage of the term femtwit, which is a compound of feminist and Twitter, and short, verb to short. Femtwit has been used as a disparaging, kind of like chastising label allocated to women perceived by anti-feminists to be intolerably loud on social media without causing any real change. Verb to short means useless ranting, okay, allocated again to female netizens in order to demean and discredit their voices and opinions. And all this led to a realization that, okay, female activists, they simultaneously they have many battlefronts. They have to seek tactics to even handle misogynist and anti-feminist discourses, ironically propagated by anti-government protesters who call themselves progressive, fighters for democracy, and even champions of human rights. So on the slide, please let me pay homage to 67-year-old Warawan Saang, or AKA Papao, Auntie Pao, who on the 28th of September 2021 stripped naked as a symbolic act in her confrontation with armed police officers, of course, whose agenda and mission have been to suppress and disperse protesters violently. And as a result, Auntie Pao was charged with breaching the emergency decree and section 388 of the Thai Criminal Code, for being naked in public. And not only that, she has to face, examples of sexist comments, which target not only Auntie Pao, but also women in general. For example, and I translate, with no husbands, women will just be so repressed like this. The photo is even more terrifying than Annabelle. Annabelle, I put the image of Annabelle there. Shit, with vomiting emojis, gif, mouthing yakta uak, which means I want to puke. Now, another example of GBV, gender-based violence, and epistemic violence, which is the more subtle form of GBV, which I would like to raise awareness really in this talk, will be the plight of former Faculty of Arts student Sirin Mungjaran or Fleur. Now, at the protest organized at Chulalongkorn University on the 24th of Feb 2021, after the strange, daily flag ceremony where the Thai national anthem was played at 6 p.m. And after the security guard has taken down the national flag, Fleur attempted to raise a black flag as a symbolic act of protest. And immediately, two men from the university administration, as well as field security guards, confronted her and forcefully pulled the black flag off her hand. A video of Sirin, I'm showing this a little bit, was recorded and later released and shared virally. And she was attacked instantly. Yeah, sorry, I have no time to show the video, but you can find it. So these are just few examples, okay, of what Fleur had to go through. And I have to thank Fleur and her allies for sharing these with me. For instance, like comments like, is Fleur still a virgin? Are the hymens of those feminists thicker than those of ordinary women? I wonder. You know, we're in the 21st century, we're still talking about hymens. So if I feel horny about if I fuck this person, I wonder what all of you would think of me. These are the many instances where female activists were body shamed, and sexually objectified online. You know, so in October 2020, even, you know, pictures of many female activists' private parts were shared on exclusive online groups at 299 baht. Yeah, I don't know how to convert it to krona now, you know, but according to a report from Prashat High English, 65 out of 1,172 participants said pictures or videos of themselves were taken without consent in a single protest rally. This, the male protesters would never have experienced. Slut shaming as part of witch hunting is also the name of the game. And this is a more subtle form of violence that we see, right? Every bit as part of online GBV, of which consequence affects offline everyday life of female activists like Fleur. Now, according to her words, you know, the violence inflicted upon her drove her to paranoid, drove her to depression. It would have driven me the same, causing her to self-censor and to deactivate her social media accounts, you know, and she felt that her life was ruined. The stake is always higher for vocal women, you know. And I'm talking about a structural phenomenon called epistemic violence, the violence exerted on the level of knowledge and discourses, as well as knowledge and discursive production. For example, the coinage of femtwits, you know, to pit bad feminists versus good feminists being less vocal and more PC, you know, which actually harks us back to, you know, I like Virginia Woolf, so harks us back to the suffrage movement history of how militant suffragettes were pit against reformist suffragists. You know, it's very classic. So epistemic violence in this case denies or undermines the agency of women, and it is propelled by individual actions, but it is independent from them. And epistemic violence is different from the traditional definitions of violence, which usually involve an agent, individual or collective, just like when we think about institutional violence, you know, and it involves an action or a set of specific actions, and it involves a victim. That's the traditional kind of violence. But on the contrary, epistemic violence is more gradual, more cumulative and diffuse, as it tends to lack precise location, precise temporality, and specific agents who inflict and execute it. So, you know, the illusion of anonymity on certain social media platform like Twitter, you know, you are never anonymous on Twitter, you know that, you know, can be a fertile soil and territory where this kind of violence thrives. Epistemic violence tends to be imperceptible to many, including its own victims. And I know this because I interviewed about 20 female activists, including transgender women as well. And now its effects, okay, go far beyond censorship of individual voices to calling into question, you know, the binary opposition of victim versus victimizer, you know, in terms of approach to violence even. And I'm very inspired by Moira Perez, who observes rightly that epistemic violence tends to be absent from international organizations, state agencies, as well as social movements, public agenda. And, you know, even if this form of violence has dire ethical and political consequences, you know, it involves preclusion instead of exclusion. So such preclusion of epistemic violence, you know, it can lead to political marginalization by default. So there's no mention of the term epistemic violence anywhere in the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women in 1993. But by all means, okay, I focus on epistemic violence. I do not bypass sexual harassment or physical violence that Kim Chan-o-cha had to go through, you know, harassed by male pro-democracy activists, or Ice Rakchanok Sinok, who was actually assaulted by Tom Yutalert, or Nalin Rat Tutaptim, who's violated by her teacher at her school. You know, by all means, that's all in my research, but today we don't have much time, and I'd like to call up to raise awareness on this subtle form of violence more. So such epistemic violence, GBV against women, we see within and we see outside, you know, it's internal and external, you know, it's in the pro-democracy movement. And it can be heard echoed in the constitutional court ruling as well, you know. So ironically, those who reiterated like the view reiterated by those deemed themselves progressive, as you see on the slide. And to be fair, both have publicly apologized after being heavily called out. What they said really bear resonance to the content of the ruling, done by 9 male judges who unanimously decided on 17th of November 2021 that Section 1448, which is a provision in the Civil and Commercial Code stipulating that a marriage shall only be between a man and a woman, was constitutional. When John Wynyu's views imply, which imply that LGBTQINA plus rights are just additional or exceptional rights, far different from so-called basic rights, we see something similar, we see similar line of thought in the court ruling. And of course, marriage between people with gender diversity may not be able to create such a delicate bond. What rubbish, right? So this is actually contrary to or inconsistent with the Gender Equality Act of 2015. What we see in the constitutional ruling was actually against, the international covenants which Thailand has signed and ratified, like ICCPR or the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ICESCR. I'm a literature person. It's very hard for me to go through abbreviations. But I like to draw attention to a particular judge. Okay, what I find fascinating when I was in Sweden observing from afar is that the ruling has backfired. Okay, in ways that the young people start calling out each individual judge and dig up their past deeds. And this is what they found. Professor of law and judge of constitutional court, Tawikiat Binakanit, born in 1953, educated in the US and France, wrote an analysis of the amended section to the rape clause, this piece, which is legal miscellanea, okay, entitled, and I translate it because I like the Netflix series, How to Get Away with Murder, so How to Get Away with Rape Under the Amended Law, was published in the respected law journal in 2012. Look, it's been dug up. The author blames the feminist advocates. He views the amended section on the rape clause, which entails change of wording from man and woman to person, from 15 years of age, and he viewed it as being advantageous to boys. And he ends his article with these words, I translate: "If I could turn back the time and become somewhat younger than 15, I will hunt down the women's lib feminists and rape them to shame." This is a constitutional court judge. So no wonder, no surprise, that from his personal opinion, I think it's untranslated yet, I'm not sure, but kudos to those who've translated the constitutional court ruling. So the personal opinion of this particular male judge, you can see, if we do CDA, quickly, you see theories of two-sex model, which was prevalent in the 18th, 19th century. I mean, the thing that Virginia Woolf would say, passé, you see that in the constitutional court ruling, how the uterus became a justification of the status of women. There's like this misinterpretation or misuse of the term, the phrase act of God, because for common law, our modern jurisdiction, act of God means all natural phenomena, whose effects could not be prevented by anything, by exercise of reasonable care and foresight. But here, act of God is actually used to back up this two-sex theory, which is very strange and doesn't make any sense. What you see later in his personal opinion is that he deems the label intersex as a term which is used and extended so as only for gender to appear more varied, more diverse. Basic post-colonial theory knowledge, especially Spivak's strategic essentialism, would be needed, would be useful for him, I would say. Which entails it is a political tactic, right? Used by minority group, strategic essentialism, to actually label themselves temporarily, strategically, to fight for a cause. He doesn't know that for sure. And portraying rights as a piece of pie to be reserved and safeguarded for heterosexual couples who are portrayed in the text as natural. And homosexual couples are nothing but addendum, far from natural, something less than human species. So this constitutional court ruling is far from a ruling. I contend that we should challenge and condemn it as epistemic violence. The judges who express such opinion should be persecuted for inflicting slow violence and hegemonic death to LGBTQINA plus peoples who, like me, by the way, pay taxes and contribute to the good of Thailand. So epistemic death goes in line with necropolitics too, you know, this sort of like power to dictate who may live and who must die, you know, to when LGBT people are actually affected by this, they're actually injected death in small doses in terms of disempowerment. Now, how do we battle epistemic violence? And I think this is our triumph right now. If I'm a student right now, if I'm a scholar right now, I'd be very, very interested to see how the proliferation of social media platforms which promote gender justice. You know, so I subscribe to Percy B. Shelley. I'm a literature person, you know, and someone wise used to bring it up, you know, who said in A Defense of Poetry that philosophers, you know, poets, writers, translators, creators, content creators are actually unacknowledged legislators of the world. And this is what we're seeing right now. For example, Feminista. Feminista is an online platform designed to foster gender equality as well as feminist critical knowledge and thinking, you know, through mixed media. Wonderful articles from Feminista. Please log on. And I think their articles should be translated to English as well, you know, support them. Another epistemic violence, you know, kind of retaliation epistemic violence would be Soy, who's content creator, published many, many books like Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok Ved Menon, and Feminism for the 99%. They're doing very good work, okay? Samyan Press published independent press, you know, translated Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, and wonderful work that's my former student Fleur also translated as well. Men Explain Things to Me, you know. Also, we have individual works to retaliate against epistemic violence. As you can see in Prayut Chan-o-cha, I'm very proud of Prayut, you know, trans woman who shares her experience in the form of memoirs and who founded Genders Matter social platform to promote gender justice. And apart from that, we have That Mad Woman, you know, a lot of platforms that try to kind of debunk gender myths and prejudices. So I think we are in interesting times. Sorry, and that's all from me. Thank you very much. Duncan.
Okay, thank you so much for that fantastic presentation and raising so many critical questions and thoughts here. I should have said at the beginning, if people have questions that they'd like to ask Verita, please pose them not in the chat, but in the Q&A. So please put your questions in there and we'll see what kind of discussion we can have about some of those issues. But maybe I can kick things off by asking you, I mean, you've raised a lot of different questions here. And you started off by talking about some terribly disturbing cases where essentially people who are figures involved in the pro-democracy movement themselves became implicated in gender-based violence issues. Do you think that those concerns have produced a greater awareness within the pro-democracy movement and that there's any kind of critical reflection going on? Because some of those cases do date back to sort of middle and late 2020. In the intervening period, has there been progress of any sort?
I hope so. I can't answer that really because I'm observing from afar, and plus I have to say I forgot to say my intersectional disclaimer. You know, I'm a lesbian feminist, being part of the movement supporting the Feminist Liberation Front, and very clearly involved. And I'm also I have been subjected to attacks as well, bordering death threats sometimes for speaking out. So I'm not sure, but I do hope that there's with this proliferation of online platforms and new publications and academic discussions, you know, that things are changing. I do hope. I think I'm hopeful. I think there's a change. Yeah. At least the people who propagated, who inflicted such epistemic violence or produced some sort of like sexist, misogynist discourses, they're quick to apologize, and that is okay enough for us. I think we're very forgiving, so hopefully.
Right, and have there been new instances over the past few months even since the initial kind of wave of concerns that was raised about this? Does it continue with the same intensity as it was doing, say, in the second half of 2020?
I think so. I think so. I mean, in terms of, well, I have shown in the slide in terms of the female activists who went vocal, you know, who, it's almost like there's another Me Too kind of like phenomenon right now. So female activists are being more and more vocal about the sexual assaults, you know, the sexual violation that they have experienced. And we can see from the comments as well that there are more male feminists or more allies who actually commented and sympathetically as well, because we monitor the comments that were being posted under the stories shared as well. So I think that there is the intensity is there and increasing, and I think that there might be good signs of improvement on that part, I hope. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Still inviting questions. I haven't seen any pop in yet, but I still have many of my own. Perhaps you could elaborate a bit on, because your central argument is about epistemic violence. And I guess a lot of people are familiar with phrases like gender-based violence or structural violence. So how exactly would epistemic violence differ from structural violence, for example?
I think when we talk about structural violence, it's a little bit wider than epistemic violence. We may be able to see epistemic violence as a subset of structural violence. You know, when we talk about structural violence, gender poverty is also one. You know, so it's wider. It's more like an umbrella term. For me, I think that epistemic violence is narrow, more specific, and it has, according to like scholars like Monica Fricker, I think Fricker, she also kind of like connected epistemic violence with epistemic injustice, apart from epistemic death or hermeneutic death, you know. So there's a whole kind of like a burgeoning field that draws upon what Spivak has already, what Foucault has already formulated, what Spivak already formulated in the post-colonial context, and expanded to the debates in law. When I was in Lund, this was unheard of, I would say, because when people talk about violence and human rights, you know, they go to the covenants, they go to the declarations, whereas I'm coming from the humanities. I'm quite skeptical because the language of the law, I'm a fan of Homi K. Bhabha, and Homi K. Bhabha wrote a wonderful piece, well, many wonderful pieces, but one particular keynote speech on the language of human rights. And he said that it isn't enough to actually try to fit human suffering, like life. Of course, he said this in the context of refugees, to fit it into the language of law and covenants and universal declarations, because he said that realm is a loveless realm. You know, he's a literature person. And he said that we should start not from the perfectibility of universal rights, of human rights, but start with the imperfectibility. Start from something that you can see what Hannah Arendt said about Jews, you know, like how our rights are stripped bare. We became bare life, you know, like we're oppressed in day-to-day basis. Start from human suffering, you know, and situate it in the debate of human rights, not to fit anyone in the language of law. So that's so when I included that in the research conducted when I was in Lund, you know, many of the students in Lund and also my colleagues said that it's quite new, and the fact that I think I'm the only literary scholar there was actually quite new for them as well. So I think that, yeah, there are many ways of thinking about epistemic violence. Epistemic violence for me is very much situated in literary criticism. Yeah.
Great. Okay, we've got lots of questions all coming in a flash now. So let me go to some of the questions from the audience. So Eric White asks, to what degree have online counter responses to this anti-feminist epistemic violence also given rise to offline counter responses in Thailand? Could you say a bit about these responses outside of internet discourses and social media?
Okay, thank you. Let me think just a bit. To what degree? I think, for example, I can give you an example of the term femtwit and chart. I mean, originally the terms were coined as part of an anti-feminist kind of like attempt to tone police to tone police and language police women of feminists. I think feminists of all sexes, who are vocal online. And what happened is that, okay, there's immediate retaliation online where people hashtag themselves as femtwit, re-own and reappropriate the term femtwit. And not only that, I followed the protest closely. I joined the protest as much as possible. I see, well, the feminist group holding placards, also paint themselves, label themselves femtwit as a kind of retaliation. So that's the offline retaliation that can be seen as a continuation from the online retaliation of the anti-feminist discourses. That is one example that comes to mind right now. There are also symbolic kind of like expressions on the streets as well. For example, this feminist song, rapist in your way, from Chile, was actually translated into the Thai Sida Lui Fai, the trials of Sida. Of course, Sida is a character, right, from the Ramayana, who's been mistreated by this spoiled brat called Rama. I'm sorry to say that, but and then the song is translated in ways I can even show you. I have a slide, but to just recount, it's translated on Telegram. Like people are trying to find ways to translate the song overnight, and then performed, I think, the next day on the street. So if you know what's been performed in Chile, you will see that being performed at the protest site in Thailand. And I feel that it's wonderful, as a literary scientist, literary scholar, to see how translation has the power to actually unite people, unite feminists, all the feminists in the world unite, by this song. It's just a wonderful thing. So I don't know if I answered your question, Eric, but thank you very much for raising that.
Yeah, I think you did. That was pretty good. Okay, we've got a couple of questions from Chulalongkorn. Thank you so much for a chilling and moving talk. 2 questions to share. What would be necessary to build and create a movement where patriarchal and anti-LGBTQIA plus epistemic violence is no longer so present?
And the second, okay, first.
Yes.
What would be necessary to
yes.
build?
What would you need to do to reduce the violence, essentially? What kind of movement?
I was like, I think we were talking about this, Duncan, but
yes.
I was like anticipating this question. Thank you very much,
right.
Jarell.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult to say, but education. It might seem well, promoting the things that I really love, like literature, humanities. I think humanities is very important. We need, of course, like a union. We need a group. We need to be united in the movement. At the same time, because epistemic violence can only be undone, can only be retaliated on the level of episteme. So the only way to go actually is this slow solution, slow, painful, patient solution of building solid knowledge and understanding, in ways that we could rethink the epistemic violence which is around us. So it's a very difficult question, but I think the question itself should be the goal of our mission. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
And
if you're back to Shelley, it's sounds like more poets and able to create alternative imaginative worlds that are less pernicious and more humane. Yeah, and Tyrrell also raises another question, which was in my mind when you were responding just now. You were saying you'd welcome apologies, and that would be good. And she says, "Are apologies enough? I'm glad that figures who make anti-queer, anti-feminist comments feel compelled to apologize, but is it enough?"
No, I was being too nice. I know it's a habit that all women had to no, it's not enough. It's not enough at all, but at least at this stage they apologize, even though they have been called out heavily before apologizing, but it's not enough. They should do something else. They should join us, be our allies, dedicate themselves to the cause, because most of the comments that you see are actually these people looking at us from outside and thinking that, oh, what are you doing? Think about how many signatures that are signed for for marriage equality, for a country of how many people? The number is very low. I think it's around for 400,000, 500,000 and counting. I mean, if we are in this together as part of a pro-democracy movement, sympathy is needed, empathy is needed. We should be generous. You do not need to be queer. You do not need to be LGBT to think that I would sign my name for marriage equality. You do not need to think, oh, I don't want to get married, that's why I'm not going to sign. I think that we need to be more generous. And of course, those who have inflicted, those who propagated discourses, sexist discourses, misogynist discourses, epistemic violence, they should do more than apologize, for sure. Tyrrell, thank you very much for raising that.
Okay, more questions are coming in. So Nopamon Swang Wibunpong says, have you seen the news about Ton Sirisak, LGBTQ plus activist, returning the it's a prize award from the Rainbow Sky Association of Thailand, Fasirung, because the director of the association supported genders rights violation events? And what do you think about that?
I think it's a very good move, and we should support it. We should support Kunton. We should support this attempt, because, I think back to Adrienne Rich, my favorite poet. She also doesn't want to accept prizes, awards. It's a symbolic act of defiance, and I think that we should do that more often, and we should support such attempt, to actually defy those who. I'm very sad about it, but those who actually, like you said, supported gender rights violation. Yeah, thank you for that, Nopamon.
Okay, and Petra Alderman, our colleague and one of the other hosts of this seminar series, says, thanks for super interesting talk. What would you say needs to be done to start changing attitudes of young Thais towards these gender questions? It's related to the earlier answer, maybe.
Yeah. Thank you. Ahoy, Petra. So, Slovak United.
Yes, right.
So,
you can answer in Slovak if you wish.
No, I'll be embarrassing myself. But yeah, thank you for this question. I think this is also, like Tyrrell's question, is also a goal. But I think what we see from the from groups that I pay homage to, I would say humbly, like Feminista, who's been working on the social platform for a very long time, the online platform for a very long time, or Soy, all these like active people who are behind it, who are behind these ventures. I think that's one step. They're trying to start changing attitudes of young Thais already. I mean, young Thais now have the vocabulary available to them in ways that I could not even imagine when I was their age, really. I mean, the change that we see, I have to say, one very wise activist that I met in Malmo told me that to be an activist, you need to have hope. There is no way to be an activist without hope. And I think our hope lies in how we see the proliferation of enterprises, of social media platforms, of publishing houses, trying to translate, socialist feminism, translate Nancy Fraser, my hero, translate all the literature for young people to have this sort of like vocabulary, to have the kind of platform that they can formulate their thoughts, that they could challenge the epistemic violence that they see, or call out, the kind of traditional violence that they experience or their friends experience. I think that it's ongoing. I mean, what needs to be done? Education. Education. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we have a question from Boyette de Mesa, who says, what do you think about authorities like president politicians? I guess I'm inserting this, it's not in the question, but Thai Prime Minister General Prayut Chan-o-cha using misogynistic comments and making it as a joke.
Well, it's disgraceful. Strongman leaders like to do this, right? I mean, Prayut is still stuck in the separation of the sphere. Like, my goodness, it's like, apart from his bikini remark, if you remember, this is disgraceful as well, what happened to the tourists. And he said, like, very disgusting thing. I don't want to even reiterate about the bikini. I said something at one time about the separation of the spheres. He said, like, oh, we men, men, we should let women rule at home. But when we're outside, women should be following our footsteps or following us, and he said that I can't think of a direct quotation, but along the line of nothing good comes out when women want equal rights. Okay, we're not even venturing to LGBT rights, this is just women want equal rights. So it's really a disgraceful thing. We should call them out. So that's what I think about the authorities. Thank you.
Okay, we could talk more about that, but there's a few more questions coming in, so let's get to those. So we have from Anna Lawathanatokun, from my experience with the protests, epistemic violence is often not recognized as violence because people often think that words can't hurt, and one wonders if those who apologize for misogynistic and homophobic comments do so because they know that what they did was violence or because they want people to stop calling them out. What do we need to do to get epistemic violence recognized as violence so that we can create a movement that is not so discriminating discriminating towards women and queer people?
Thank you, Anna. I have to say, very proud of Anna as well. She's my former student. So nice to see you here. I would say, yeah, that's spot on, isn't it? When I talk about epistemic violence as not recognized, and we need to raise awareness about that. No more sanitized conversation when it comes to epistemic violence. Words can hurt, and as a literature person, words can do so much, right? So we need to actually call out, we need to actually raise awareness. I mean, what do we need to do to get epistemic violence recognized? We need to actually come together, I would say, and articulate it, compile instances of epistemic violence, give young people the vocabulary to know, to recognize what it is, to not normalize these things, I would say. So so that we can create a movement that's not discriminating, towards women, queer people. Is a very difficult question, again, because I do not have the answer. I'm here to actually raise awareness, but I think we may come together and try to find a way, group together and try to plan things, but for sure right now it's raising awareness and articulating. Yeah, thank you, Anna.
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions are moving in these kind of directions. What can be done, what is to be done, what should be done, and these are of course questions that we often really struggle with, though they're incredibly important. So Kukasina Kubaha says, thank you for this talk and the tribute to all the fighters. Through your interviews with the activists, did many of the activists sue their online trolls? And if they did, how are the courts dealing with the cases? And this was a question I was sort of going to put you if we had a bit more time. Legal solutions are often invoked to these kind of problems. Would the answer be to take people to court? And is that something that's happening?
Well, you see, this is the thing about epistemic violence. From my interviews, I can say that the women are so forgiving. You know, like they don't sue their online trolls, and it's precisely what Anna said, because they thought it's their words. What Sirin should do is actually to sue them one by one. But look, Sirin withdrew, kind of like tried to get out of the spotlight for a bit, you know, because and I'm being subjected to the comments myself, you know. I wasn't like, it's beyond, I think it's beyond our I mean, I'm thinking of suing these people, because we're so much used to the traditional notion of violence, like what I just outlined. The traditional violence, you have an agent, a specific action, and also victim, and the law itself goes along that line. The language of the law itself goes along that line. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. Maybe this should actually be rethought. You know, epistemic violence should actually be included in finally in legal debates. I have to possibly ask my friend Nada for it, you know, whether it is possible. But because the language of law is limited, and we can't think beyond that, you know, how to retaliate in terms of law, most of the women that I interviewed did not sue their online trolls. So this is a very good question, and this is part of the problem as well. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So Natnapin Padung Patanudom says, since there are many severe online attacks upon feminist internet, I guess it's internet users, should there be some support system for femtwit or internet feminists? What policy or law designed for online platform could give some safe space or support for feminist internet activism? So we're back to this sort of what can be done, policy, legal change type of question, which
Thank
you have talked about in slightly different contexts. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on this angle.
Thank you. In terms of policy or law, I saw some events where my lawyer friends were actually discussing these things. But, you know, the thing is, the law is very weak when it comes to this. I think this is a question for the future, for future steps, you know, that can be made, can be done. I can share you this sort of like, I would say it's an amateur kind of like venture that Sirin and her friend and the Spring Movement kind of initiated, and it's called it's a web page, an online platform, blog-like, called All Thai Women. You can check that out. It's called All Thai Women, where people can write in the form of a blog and share stories of gender-based violence in many forms. And I wanted to actually, you know, develop that website with my colleagues, you know, with Sirin and her friends very much, and we're trying to find funding for it, you know, in order to kind of like gather, you know, we need to work with linguists, I would say, you know, a corpus of all the terms, terminology, of the experience gathered, you know, that we can actually pinpoint and say that what this is, these words hurled at you, these discourses which harm you, these can be called epistemic violence, you know, which we needed to kind of train the AI. There are like many steps that we need to make, and that's what we do, because I'm not a lawyer, my student's not a lawyer, but of course the best way is actually to have people in law talk about epistemic violence, because I think it's high time.
Okay, I think we just have time to have one last question, which is again from Eric. What do you think explains why the women subject to this epistemic violence are so quickly and easily forgiving?
Centuries and centuries of being historically excluded, centuries of being portrayed or being called trash. You know, when there is this sort of like hashtag, you know, men are trash, which is normally accompanied the stories of sexual harassment. You know, the phenomenon that I see is that anti-feminists would immediately jump in and said, it's not all men are trash, and immediately debunk the stories told, you know, and telling the story, articulating sexual harassment itself, believe me, it's already very difficult.
Right.
And to have these people coming in and said, why are you attacking men? Men are not trash. Oh my God, this is hate speech. You know, you can see that women had training for centuries and centuries to be easily forgiving, which actually we're not, but you know, to think of ourselves as trash. Why is it that when people say women are trash, we feel like, oh, okay, women are trash. Oh, this discourse, I heard it, Victorian times. Oh, we saw that, you know, in history. But when men are trash, oh my goodness, it's such a big thing, you know. So you can see that there's this inequality embedded, you know, historically. So I think it's a matter of history. It's a matter of centuries of inequality in terms of law, in terms of values, culture, everything. Thank you.
Okay, we do have one last question, which is a long comment. Thank you for raising awareness on such an important element. What I see as a particularly important element is historical narrative creation, how women in the pro-democratic movement will be remembered, and perhaps in the future history textbooks will loudly acknowledge the works of courageous Thai feminist pro-democracy protesters, which is not the case in various other places. But thank you for this lecture, and good luck in your fight, and greetings from Sweden. There's a little bit more in there that we don't have time to read out.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne, my Slovak friend.
Very good. Okay, so thanks so much, Verita, for a fascinating, if as we've heard, at times chilling, disturbing, disconcerting, but very, very important talk, which has generated some really interesting questions. And I think these questions will reverberate and continue and will not be readily answered, but this has been really a fantastic seminar and a great opportunity for people to hear the kinds of ideas and critiques that you have and bring them into conversation with a new audience. So this has really been great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Very honored. Thank you for the questions as well.
Yes, thanks a lot for our wonderful questioners and for Sriniat for pulling everything together technically, and all our partners. Thanks a lot, everybody, and we will be back again next month with yet another talk, which you saw a flash ahead to momentarily. And we'll circulate emails, and that will be on the SEAC and other websites very shortly. Thanks very much.